This is What Does It Profit? And I'm your host, Dr. Dawn Carpenter. In this show, we talk about value, the social and moral value of business. Each episode, each guest will bring me a little closer to finding out what does it profit. Here we are. We've reached the end of our second season, and we're sending you off with a bonus episode. This episode comes out of a conversation from our pilot episode about shareholder activism, all the way back in Season 1. It also derives from our Season 1 bonus episode with Nobel Peace Laureate Jody Williams in the episode we called The Price of the Ecuadorian Chernobyl. Remember, this is the story of Chevron and the decades of oil dumping in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Jody shared with us the backstory of the mounting call for Chevron's board of directors and executive management to honor its legal liabilities in Ecuador and move forward with what this ethicist sees as the company's moral obligation to own up, pay up, and set a plan in place to do better. You know, the problem is that this is what Chevron says it's doing. Really? On What Does It Profit? We are on the hunt for the angels of capitalism, those people and industries that try to elevate the promise of the social and moral value of business. But let's be real, we live in a complicated world, and our conversation today is as simple as it is complicated. We have a David and Goliath story of epic proportion. Today, we're talking to the man who's been placed at the center of it all, human rights lawyer Steven Donziger, who for nearly 30 years has dedicated his life to the 30,000 indigenous people in Ecuador who have trusted him as their advocate as they've chased down Chevron in courts around the world seeking justice. You might ask, why are we having this conversation now? Let's just say the injustice in this case is now hitting a little too close to home, right here in New York, where Chevron is seeking to shut down Steven once and for all in a retaliatory lawsuit that's meant to silence and bankrupt him. You know, do the math. Chevron owes the Ecuadorians $9.5 billion. Now, Chevron wants $60 billion from Steven. I guess when Chevron does things, they go big. This is the largest potential personal liability in American history. You know, as a banker, I follow the money, and I suspect there's more to the story. We have a lot we could talk to Steven about, but today we're going to be talking to this crusading human rights lawyer who's managed to use the tools of capitalism in service to human rights. And I think this is what's spooking Chevron, and perhaps the entire petrochemical industry. And now let's welcome to What Does It Profit, Steven Donziger. Steven, how are you? That's a loaded question. I'm not even sure how to ask that, but let's hear your answer.
Well, that's a kind of an unusual question to ask a guy in my position, since I've been in house arrest for almost 2 years in the Upper West Side of Manhattan as a lawyer. But all things considered, Dawn, it's great to be on your show, and I feel really great. And, you know, I don't like the deprivation of my freedom, but, you know, having contact with you and others like you who are interested in my story makes me feel good and hopeful and resilient and gives strength to me and my family. So it's great to be here.
Oh, that's great. Well, you mentioned your family, and you're sequestered in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I think a lot of your fellow New Yorkers have some, you know, root connectedness to this because of COVID. But you've got a family with you, right? You have a 15-year-old son, I think, and a wife. How's it going with the three of you?
You know, my son is in ninth grade, and because of COVID, he's hasn't really been in school this year. It's been all online. So that's been incredibly challenging. And he's also dealing with a father who wears an ankle bracelet 24/7 because of my work as an environmental lawyer, challenging the fossil fuel industry and Chevron for its pollution. So, it's been challenging for him, but he's a great kid. He's kind. And he and my wife, Laura, we just celebrated our 15th anniversary last week.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We're proud of what we've accomplished. And, the attacks on me from the judicial system and from Chevron are designed to make my life as difficult as possible. And I believe to destabilize, if not destroy, my familial connection. So the fact that we have maintained it and it's strong is huge for us. And I'll also say that, even though I'm under house arrest, we try to create happiness every day in this home, within the four walls of our home. And I think we do, whether it's a dinner, a conversation, loving each other.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got 2 kids at home right now, and we had lunch together today. And what did we talk about? We talked about Chevron. And I have a 17 and a 22-year-old. And boy, I tell you, they were trying to imagine what it must be like for your son. And so, we feel it in our house, too. And I think we've got, some kinship in that way. And I think we have some kinship, in a little bit of our backstory. I don't want to go too far into this because we have a lot to talk about today. But, we're both alums of American University here in Washington, D.C. They teach us that, we should go out and, find truth and justice in the world. So you left, your undergraduate studies and you went to South America. And I'm telling the listeners about this because this, I think, is, how I see how all this got started. You left to be, a journalist before you became, a human rights lawyer. So you were looking for these human stories. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's interesting. Wow, you dug into my background. Well, basically, when I got out of college, when I was at American University, I was very active on the student newspaper. I was an editor, and I wanted to pursue journalism when I got out of college. And I got a job in the United Press International Bureau in Washington, covering Washington stories, which I found really interesting. But I wanted to just get overseas. So I, on my own, went to Nicaragua, Managua in 1983.
That was a crazy time. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a civil war or whatever, a Reagan administration funded attack on a leftist government down there. Central America was like the flashpoint of the Cold War back then.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you remember at American University, we had a large donor to the university who was selling arms down there.
Adnan Khashoggi, of course I remember. I think they named the library after him.
No, it was the athletic building, and I was there when they were sandblasting the letters off the building. It's crazy.
Maybe we knew each other back then. Who knows?
I'm going to pull out an old yearbook. All right. So here you are. You're down witnessing all of this stuff. How the heck did you end up going to law school?
It was very simple. As a journalist, at least the methodology of American journalism at that time, you were like a third-party objective observer of events. And I'm watching events unfold that, I couldn't believe my eyes, the destruction, the death, the immorality of a lot of what was happening that I was writing about. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be comfortable being a journalist. I think I need to be more of an advocate. So I'm like, I'm going to transition from journalism to law school where I can do what I really want to do, which is to help people.
No, it's really so you could play basketball with Barack Obama.
Yeah, exactly.
No, seriously, were you guys at Harvard at the same time?
Yeah, we were in the same class. And this is a kind of a funny story, but so when we got to Harvard Law, and by the way, I'm one of the few people who went from the Harvard on the Potomac American to
exactly.
the real Harvard.
I don't know. I did my doctorate at Georgetown, so there's a little bit of rivalry on the Potomac side. But I'll let you get off with that one because I'm an Eagle too.
Exactly. So, and I'm proud of my American University degree. But anyway, at Harvard Law, when I got there, as a first-year student, the administration had printed up a little book with pictures of like maybe 30 students who had done things that they found interesting. They were like highlighting us, and they highlighted me. My picture is in there for my work as a journalist in Nicaragua. And I was out 5 years before I went back to law school. And Barack Obama's picture was in the same book for work he had done as a community organizer in Chicago. So a lot of the people in that book who had done kind of this type of work, we became friends. And we're all a little bit older because we had been out a few years. And Barack and I became friends. I don't want to exaggerate this. I haven't talk to him since he was elected president.
That kind of puts a barrier. I used to have a physician who now is President Biden's physician. So it's like, okay, Dr. Kevin and I have this, different kind of relationship. The White House changes everything.
It's true. But, we were on the same law school basketball team, and we were friends, and, we weren't super close friends. We were definitely friends.
Yeah, but the point I guess I'm trying to make is that, there is like this generation of people who, have this kind of call in their soul to do these kinds of things. And we all kind of take a different path. And, he heads into politics and you head into human rights. And so let's figure out how you jumped down to Ecuador. How'd you get there?
Before we leave Barack, as I told my wife when I was dating her, I'm like, she goes, "You went to law school with Barack Obama?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "How is it that he's about to become president of the United States and you're like slogging around oil pits in the Amazon jungle?" Like,
what the heck did you tell her? what was your response? What'd you tell her?
I said, this is...
You said, "You love me, darling."
Crazy, but true. And I said, "I love my work." And honestly, of course, being president of the United States would be quite a challenge and an honor, but I would not have traded my human rights work, which was my calling, to be an elected politician. And, and also my wife said that, she always told me from the beginning, she goes, "Oh, I love what you do. It doesn't matter. We could live in a shack and I'd still love you," And so we've really put her to the test because basically Chevron has taken all my money after we won the case against them.
Oh, that's right. Let's start the story there, if it's okay with you, because you've been... it's their words, because I understand there's an email that exists somewhere in the universe that highlights the corporate legal strategy in this case, which is demonize Donziger. Is that true? Does that really exist?
Yeah. 2009, Chris Geddes, who's an official in Chevron, wrote an email to a bunch of Chevron and said, "Remember, our long-term strategy is to demonize Donziger." It's a company that, deliberately dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste into the Amazon, decimated indigenous groups, caused cancer, poisoned the rainforest. All of that is not disputed. They don't even dispute it, So rather than deal with that, clean it up, or at least defend a lawsuit on the merits of those allegations, they're like, "Oh, we're just going to attack the lawyer to distract attention from what we did." And I've been dealing with this now for 10 years. I am without question the target of the most well-financed corporate retaliation campaign in U.S. history ever directed against a lawyer or an activist. They have used 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers to attack me. And I work out of my apartment in Manhattan at the kitchen table where I sit right now. I'm just a guy working out of his kitchen table, going up against 2,000 lawyers. And they haven't been able to bring me down. They have not been able to bring me down.
You're humble, though, because you may be sitting at your kitchen table. Well, because you have to be sitting at your kitchen table. It's not like you are some fringe, uneducated, uncredentialed person that sometimes I think they're trying to make you sound like. And so anyway.
It kills them when I do interviews. It kills them when I testify in court. It kills them when I speak to law students or make speeches to the European Parliament, as I did recently, because people can judge me based on who I am and what I say, not the caricature they pay a lot of money to try to pin on me. And, I realized a few years ago that the best way for me to deal with what they're throwing at me is to get out there and do interviews and to be me, which is what I try to do.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you decided to be you here. And, I want to bring this back to the people, because you went through very quickly, the ecological terrorism, those are my words, going on. And again, it was Texaco, who was the predecessor company to Chevron. Chevron bought these liabilities and now bought this mess. But just paint quickly a picture. I'm an adoptive mother of a daughter who was affected by the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl. I know what happens with severe birth defects and with cancer. But there are over, 30,000 farmers and indigenous people in the Ecuadorian Amazon region who are affected by this. What does that look like? Talk about some of the realities of what that means to the people there.
Well, it's just devastating. Look, where we live, we know we will have water, drinkable water, because we just go to the faucet and turn it on. I mean, for the most part, not always, as we learned from Flint, Michigan, but for the most part in America, you can get water out of your faucet and drink it and not die. In Ecuador, in the Amazon, where indigenous groups live, you can't get clean water because historically the groups drink out of the rivers and streams, and they were all poisoned by oil pollution and discharges from the production waters, which have all these chemicals that cause cancer. So, in this area, you have little babies, dying of leukemia at a few months of age. I mean, you never see that up here. People die of leukemia after, years and years of exposures to toxins or smoking or whatever it may be. You don't have babies die of leukemia. But in Ecuador, you do, because it's all poisoned, so the babies are getting exposed at a very young age where their immune systems aren't developed. So it's a humanitarian catastrophe. And the worst part is the abuse. I mean, when Texaco, now Chevron, went in there in the 1960s, they started just dumping the stuff. They could have made a ton of money and a ton of profits had they just disposed of the waste properly. Instead, they just dumped it to make even more money without regard to the welfare of the indigenous peoples there. And, right now all the groups have been decimated. They've all been displaced from their territory. The forest cannot support them in their traditional territory because it's been poisoned. And when you go down there, and I've been there over 250 times, you go to these communities and people are hurting. Who knows someone who's died of cancer?
Oh, absolutely.
And usually 90% of the people raise their hands.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's like visiting my daughter's hometown in Russia, right across the Ukrainian border. It's the same kind of thing.
You've dealt with the Chernobyl issue in Russia. What Texaco/Chevron did in Ecuador is known as the Amazon Chernobyl. And it is the worst oil-related catastrophe on Earth. But, it's a little different than the Russia Chernobyl or, say, the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico, because in Ecuador, it was done deliberately to save money. This was not an accident. The BP spill was an accident. They didn't want that
mess to happen. Yeah, exactly.
But BP's paid 70 billion US as compensation and fines. And, Chevron did something much worse for much longer, did it intentionally, not by accident. And they lost a court case and they haven't paid $1.
Yeah, and I think they've been making you pay. So there's a complicated legal story, and our listeners aren't, by and large, in the legal community. But, let's give them a shorthand, kind of step-by-step, the steps in the legal process, because I want to get quickly to where you are now, which is in a very precarious, curious, shocking place, which I think, to me, if there's a David and Goliath story 2.0 or 30.0, wherever we are in history, you are it. You are David. And so tell us how you got to where you are now under house arrest. I call it house arrest.
I'm going to try to keep this really simple because I'm never good at this part. So 2 facts. One is I led a legal team that won a $9.5 billion pollution judgment against Chevron in Ecuador's courts, where Chevron accepted jurisdiction, wanted the trial held, and that judgment has been affirmed by the 2 highest courts of Ecuador and the Supreme Court of Canada. We won. We won the case. Okay. Second fact, Chevron cannot accept the fact that we won, so they started to attack me. And they sued me in the United States, bribed a witness with $2 million to claim that I approved the bribe of the trial judge in Ecuador. This witness is an admitted liar. He was coached for 53 days by Chevron's lawyers before he testified falsely about me. And a U.S. trial judge who used to be a tobacco industry lawyer denied me a jury and found that he was going to believe this witness who, again, was an admitted liar over my word.
Well, and I know, and he's recanted. Isn't that correct?
He has recanted. And remember that the judgment in Ecuador was validated by 29 different appellate judges. So there's only this one U.S. trial judge, Lou Kaplan, the tobacco guy, who claims the case is illegitimate. And he's been attacking me along with Chevron ever since.
We know what happened in the tobacco industry, and here we go again.
Kaplan, who's the judge in my case, was a major tobacco defense lawyer. He worked for Philip Morris, Brown and Williamson. He was on the top level committee that organized all this bad faith subterfuge to undermine the law so the tobacco industry could get away with killing people with cancer sticks. And he became a judge, and he was helping Chevron do the same thing to me.
Unbelievable.
He ended up locking me up when he claimed I didn't turn over my computer and cell phone, which would have violated attorney-client confidentiality. Instead, I appealed it. And while it was pending appeal, that is the lawfulness of his order, he locked me up. And I've been here for 2 years on a misdemeanor where the longest sentence possible if convicted, which I have not been convicted, but if convicted is 180 days. So why am I here? And I'm being prosecuted by a private Chevron law firm, not the government. The government rejected the case. This has never happened before in the United States.
Where is our new attorney general?
We're trying to get Merrick Garland to pay attention to this because honestly, look, it hurts me, hurts my family, I think is a violation of the law. But it goes way beyond me, man. This hurts our country, hurts the rule of law for everybody, for all advocates, and makes our country look ridiculous in the eyes of the world. Locking up a lawyer on a misdemeanor for doing his job, winning a human rights case, that's what's going on here. They're going to try to put me in jail. That's their next move. Well, go ahead.
All right. Well, I wanted to ask a question about all this, how on earth we could be such a bad example in the judicial space. But I understand The Hague, the Dutch court, has recently ruled. But it's interesting, when you go to Google on that ruling, depending upon the source of the article, there is a wildly different headline. So tell us what happened. How did, you got this case in New York, and how does the Dutch court get involved? This is recently, within, the last month or so.
This is another layer of complexity that is often misunderstood.
Right.
The Dutch court is not involved in this case. Can I tell you why they come up when you Google this case? Chevron, to avoid the liability it owes to the people it poisoned in Ecuador, sued Ecuador's government under a U.S.-Ecuador bilateral investment treaty in a private secret arbitration that was not part of The Hague. It was a private arbitration held behind closed doors. We didn't participate. We couldn't even testify. We couldn't watch it, couldn't even read the papers. And this is an investment arbitration, which is another reason why people are so frustrated with our world, right? I mean, Chevron essentially thought, well, we're losing to Steven Donziger and his clients. We're going to then go pin the liability we owe the Ecuadorians onto their own government and basically get a taxpayer-funded bailout for its pollution from the Ecuadorian people. That was their theory. And they went into this arbitration, and the arbitrators, who get paid a ton of money by Chevron, ruled in Chevron's favor. But it has no relevance to our judgment that is now being enforced against Chevron's assets. It's a private arbitral judgment that I don't think is enforceable. I think it's illegal. But in any event, it doesn't affect what the rights of the Ecuadorians are vis-a-vis Chevron. They've won their case and they will enforce their judgment. But the fact it comes up is an example of how Chevron has so much money, they just create these cases out there. And if you don't know how the international legal system works and you read what came up on your Google search, and you would think, wow, that's a really good result for Chevron. In reality, it's the product of Chevron's fraudulent evidence through this paid witness, Alberto Guerra. They paid him $2 million to testify against me, and we didn't participate. So it doesn't affect us.
Steve, this is the stuff that Hollywood movies are made of. This stuff. I mean, it's actually a plot you couldn't even devise because it's so over the top. You mentioned in talking about this in the Dutch court, and did I understand correctly that they did not impact the liability that's owed? Am I getting that clear? Chevron still owes that liability.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I'm a banker, right? So if I'm a shareholder, I would say, holy smokes, I still have this, arguably unfunded liability, but in the big scheme of their earnings is probably pretty paltry, but it's still, and God knows, forgive me, I've got my hand up to heaven, that I'm sure that Texaco, this isn't the only place that Texaco was using this, operating strategy. So I would think there's an awful lot at stake going on at this. But on top of all of that, and this is what gets back to our show, I think what you're doing is fascinating in terms of how you're financing this incredibly expensive, long litigation process, the search for justice. Tell our listeners how you're actually using what I would call the tools of capitalism kind of against this behemoth of the capitalist system. What is it, fourth largest petrochemical company in the world? How are you paying for all this?
Well, that's a fabulous question. I'm glad you asked it. So, in a nutshell, this type of case, getting to this level, has never happened before. And I think the reason is we really figured out the last mile to do this case. Like, if you don't have resources, even if you have good legal claims, you can't do the case. You can't get the lawyers. You don't have the staying power when the corporation with its superior resources tries to overwhelm you with paper and lawyers, which Chevron has tried to do for years in this case. And we still have sustained the case through a model where we call it capitalism in service of human rights. And basically what we did, and I want to take at least some credit for this because I was instrumental in making this happen, is we sort of looked at these indigenous groups who have the victims of pollution. They have powerful legal claims, but no money. So they don't have money to get lawyers to realize the value of their legal claims. And so, and the Chevrons of the world count on that reality when they choose to pollute, knowing it's highly likely they will get away with it because the people they're victimizing don't have money to hire lawyers. They count on that reality. And what we did is we went in and we leveraged the value of the claims before they were even brought into court, got people to invest in the claims in exchange for a right to get their investment back if there was to be a victory or some sort of collection on the claims. Use the investment money to hire lawyers to then bring the claims and increase their value as you little by little win in court, which is what we've done.
Right. Let me stop there because I want to ask, kind of a clarifying question, because as listeners hear this, there might be those kind of critics or skeptics that say, there are all of these kind of environmental groups they've got a financial stake in this, and that's why they're perpetuating and all that. But tell everyone what happens if you get nothing.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, first of all, we own the fact that the judgment is owned almost overwhelmingly by the affected peoples, but there is a little slice of it that is owned by third parties who have put up the money to do the case, which is no different than any investment in capital. It's like a venture investment, okay? With the difference being that it's high risk, because if we don't collect, and we haven't collected, the investors get nothing. They lose all their money. So they're really being compensated for the risks they're taking, and also the years. I mean, people invested back in the 90s. It's now 2021. So.
Well, and Steven, you think about the other large class and mass action lawsuits. There are very brave, trial lawyers who've said we'll risk our own capital because we know that our plaintiffs don't have the wherewithal. And I'm hearing that same thing here, but in a human rights context.
That's exactly right. And that's what's a little bit different. A lot of commercially oriented cases or traditional plaintiff side cases in the United States get funded through the same structure. What's unusual about this is it's really being funded. It's a mass human rights case in the Amazon with indigenous peoples who figured out a way to tap into a global network of support, wealthy individuals and even funds that give a darn about the environment. Yeah, they want to make money, but there's a lot easier ways to make money than invest in this case. So they're investing in this case really primarily to drive it forward, to get justice for the people of Ecuador and to use it as a new paradigm of how you can fund these human rights cases against the fossil fuel industry. And let me be clear about one thing. This is very important. Chevron is a major polluter, not just in Ecuador, but in other countries. We've studied this company. They have lawsuits against them over pollution in 87 different countries, just to be clear. So they're a polluter. The planet is suffering from a climate crisis that threatens the future of everybody, children or grandchildren, future generations. If human rights and environmental justice lawyers cannot do this work, the work that I've done and other lawyers on our team have done for many years, it's going to be a lot harder to save our planet. These companies have to know they cannot pollute with impunity. to increase their profits. They cannot privatize profits and socialize costs onto the most vulnerable communities on the planet as they did in Ecuador, in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So this work is critical to kind of realign the incentive structure in the fossil fuel industry such that there's not over drilling and there's not companies investing in oil operations that if they actually had to pay the complete cost of production, they would never invest in. But they just go, we'll invest because we can get away with it. These are indigenous peoples. We'll just dump onto their lands, make more money, and we'll leave them with the bill, which is what Chevron did in Ecuador. So it's very important that we continue to do this work. And I see, just to kind of bring this around to what we earlier talked about, I mean, Chevron's attacks on me and other lawyers, and ultimately their ability to capture part of the federal judiciary and prosecute me through one of their law firms, one of their private law firms, is a playbook that I think the fossil fuel industry is going to want to continue to use if they can get away with it in this case. And they're going to use it to try to intimidate lawyers and activists who do this critically important work that not only is necessary to save lives in Ecuador, but is necessary to save our planet, to deal with global warming issues. So there's a lot at stake here beyond Steven Donziger's well-being.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's, the heart of all of it. All right. I cannot let you escape, no pun intended, the quintessential show question, which is, it goes back to the reference to the scripture that says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? So I ask my guests always, the work that you do, how does it profit you? How does it profit your own soul? And then I'm going to ask you that question related to the broader common good. And I think you were hinting at that in the answer to, that last question. But let's start with you personally. The work that you do when you put your head on the pillow at night and you're thinking about, okay, this is a hard day, but this is the legacy. What does it profit?
Well, I've had a wonderful life, and my professional life has been fascinating. I mean, what other American lawyer is close friends with shamans in the rainforest and presidents of different countries and, deals with talented lawyers and financial people and activists and thinkers? I mean, I've had a fabulous, fabulous life. To some degree, a lot of it has happened through this case, which is probably the most sprawling litigation in world history, involving literally thousands of lawyers, 4 different countries, 38 different courts, by the way, over 200 different judges have heard parts of this case over this long history, which, by the way, it's only lasted this long because that's Chevron's strategy, is to just never let it end because they think it's cheaper to pay lawyers than to pay the people of Ecuador. But, I've had a great life. And even though I'm locked up right now, that's interesting, too, in its own way. It's part of the journey. And even though my physical world has shrunk dramatically and I can't stand it, and I'm hurting, and so is my son and my wife, the reality is our spiritual world, our contact with supporters around the world, 55 Nobel laureates just issued a statement demanding my release. All of that has broadened our lives greatly, even though we've been physically in this 2-bedroom apartment now for literally 615 straight days without leaving. So, my mother always raised me to make the most of any situation. I mean, I can't even tell you how positive she was as a person. And I think some of that, thank God, has rubbed off on me. And I think the profit emotionally, spiritually, my knowledge, my interest in life has been enormous. And I am thankful and grateful to have worked on this. And I'm thankful most of all to the people of Ecuador who hired me. I mean, I serve at their pleasure. I'm a service provider. I don't own the case, not my case.
Well, that's what we're all called to do, to be in service to others. I went to a Jesuit university, men and women for others. That's, part of our DNA. All right.
Exactly. And, so it's a great question and I appreciate it, but
let me ask the bigger question, which is, this work and what you're shining light on, what does it profit? What does it profit the common good for people to know about this, people to act on it, and ultimately for you to be successful? How does it profit the common good for all of us?
Well, I mean,
it's almost obvious, but I want to hear you say it.
The most obvious way is we all share this world and we're going to lose it unless we stop the fossil fuel industry from destroying it. And so, being an environmental justice lawyer is about saving the planet. I mean, it can be a little thing in your community. It can be kind of a bigger international thing, like the problem in Ecuador. There's a similar problem in Nigeria, Peru. There's so many countries that have this problem. We have to deal with this industry or we're going to lose everything. And it's not just the industry, it's the ad agencies that support them. It's the law firms that support them. There's so many industries that profit from their destructive practices. So, I see my work as profiting the common good in terms of saving the planet, but I also see it profiting the common good and protecting our rights as citizens to speak out, to advocate, to file lawsuits, to call out corporate abuse, to push for a better, more just world. And, you can't lock up people or try to silence those people like Chevron is trying to do to me and believe you live in a civilized society, because it's just, they're not consistent. And I'm not condemning all of America, because we do have a lot of freedom. So let me just say this. What's happening to me is a harbinger of a real dark side to corporate power in this country. And people need to be aware. And I need support, by the way.
Okay. Let me stop you there. You gave the call. You need support. How can people support you?
Well, people can support me and my clients in Ecuador. We're in this together by going to our website, freedonziger.org. It's one word. You can donate money because we need donations to support our legal defense and deal with this monster company that's throwing dozens of law firms at me. And also to pay our expenses because I can't work. They lock me up and I haven't earned a penny the normal way for 2 years, as a lawyer. So the way I support my family, my wife luckily has a job, but to pay the expenses of dealing with this is significant. We have a defense fund to do that. And over 3,000 people, by the way, have donated over the last 16 months from around the world. And we accept donations of $1, $5, $10. Give what you can. If you can give more, please give more. It goes into a law firm in Seattle that holds it in trust. It doesn't go to me. It goes to the law firm and they administer it. So go to freedonziger.org. And also, if you can't give, that's cool. I get it. Times are tough, whatever. Go anyway and sign up to the campaign and you'll get regular communications, emails, sometimes letters of solicitation. And you can be part of this and keep up with it. And also follow me on Twitter. I post a lot on Twitter at @SDonziger. I just did a live stream last night talking about the case. It's gotten over 21,000 views. I mean, people are really engaged with this. I think they care about me, which makes me feel great. But I think more than that, they care about what the hell is happening to our country when you start locking up lawyers who are successful at holding corporate polluters accountable. What does that mean for America? So people need to please pay attention. Please get engaged. Pray for me, love my family, love the communities in Ecuador who many of whom pay the ultimate price, have it far worse than I do. And remember that I have a trial on May 10th in New York. And if you live in New York or near New York and can attend, please come. Sign up and come. And it's at the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The judge who's denied me a jury and who's, my fact finder is the same person who's locked me up now for 2 years without any evidence prior to trial. So, it's that kind of trial. It's not really a real trial. But we're going to fight like hell in that trial. And the judges in the court needs to know that the world is behind the people of Ecuador and their lawyer. So May 10th in Manhattan, follow me on Twitter. You can hear more details. But if you can get there at 10 a.m., please come down to court, sit in the courtroom, and bear witness.
Well, Steven, I'm glad that you put out that call to action. And I tell you, right around the corner from that courthouse is the fearless girl, the little tiny bronze statue staring at the New York Stock Exchange, put in place by State Street investors who owns 7% of Chevron stock.
Wow.
So let's just say, Vanguard, we're praying for you. State Street, we're praying for you. Let's see who else is on the list. I could go down. BlackRock, they're on the list. Yep. Berkshire Hathaway, they're on the list.
I would call on all of these companies to divest from Chevron.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes economic sense. And as a matter of principle, divest from Chevron and free Donziger and pay the Ecuador pollution judgment until they do free me and deal with their problem in Ecuador. People should not invest in Chevron, and they should, if they have investments, they should divest, in my view.
Well, you're right. And I'm going to round out and end our visit here today by just reminding listeners that it was the divestiture campaign in apartheid South Africa that started this whole ESG movement. And so here we are all of these years later, and we're still working on it. And so, Steven, I thank you on behalf of all of us who are listening, and we'll continue to listen to this podcast, and it will get circulated around all over the place. Just know that there are a lot of us that are supporting what you're doing, and just applaud your bravery for being, Steven. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dawn, for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and good luck with your work. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to What Does It Profit? It's official. Season 2 is now in the back catalog. As we told you last time, Season 3 starts in September. We're using this time to make some important enhancements to the show and to how we engage with you, the listener, on social media. During this time, we're flipping to a new bi-weekly schedule each second and fourth Wednesday of the month until September. So we'll be back together again May 25th, where we'll begin our interseason programming with special hosts Adam and Vanessa of the podcast Uncertain Things. We'll share with you my backstory and the ethics theory behind What Does It Profit. This little reprieve for about a month is in honor of the unexpected announcement of in-person graduations next month, where I will be sending off and out into the world some of my favorite students at Georgetown University and the Catholic University of America. Don't forget, in June, we'll start the mini recap episodes from the back catalog. So really, subscribe and tell your friends about the show. You don't want to miss a thing. In the meantime, we urge you to connect with our show on LinkedIn to meet other What Does It Profit podcast listeners, and follow us on Twitter at WDIP Podcast. As we spend these next few months building out our community on all the other social media platforms. And of course, you can meet the team and sign up for our weekly newsletter on our website, whatdoesitprofitpodcast.com. What Does It Profit is written and hosted by me, Dr. Dawn Carpenter. This episode was edited and produced by Jordan Gosporet and recorded at Switch and Board Studios. And the executive producer is me. Thanks to our talented Season 2 interns, Niels, Hannah, and Sean, other team members, and our long and illustrious group of friends and supporters can be found at whatdoesitprofitpodcast.com. Before I let you go, let me remind you to never stop asking yourself, what does it profit?